Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. If you're not a TRC member, just as a reminder, please mute your line and also stop your video. Couple of things before we get into the meeting. One is on the cyanuric acid related CRs. I will be bringing those to the table on next Monday, on the 8th, or the 3rd rather, August 3rd, to revisit by the TRC. We're still having a few discussions that I have to have with individuals, and then those CRs will be ready to go. As a reminder, and I'm sure Amanda will cover this also, we are having another meeting on the 3rd. We hope to hopefully that'll be the last, but do be prepared for at least one more beyond that. As a reminder, we have a couple of email agendas that are still out. Please get your email agenda votes to me. Those are for the 8th and also the 20th. If you need copies of the voting sheets, TRC members, please email me and we'll take care of that. Once we finish up with the CR review, we're going to have one very, very quick meeting with TRC members. This will be after the 3rd to go over entering TRC evaluations into CMAHC.org. That will be a closed meeting, so that will just be for TRC members, as no CRs will be discussed. With that being said, Amanda, I'm turning it over to you, and y'all have a good meeting.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where in the country you're located. So we're going to try to go through these CRs quickly today. We have a big agenda, but we really need to get everything wrapped up. I wanted to remind everyone that I sent out an email agenda on July 22nd. I re-forwarded that to everyone today because a few people noted that it had gone to their junk mail. So please look out for that one. I anticipate there being one additional email agenda to do, and that I would be sending that out this Wednesday. And also on Wednesday, send out the voting sheet for the July 22nd email agenda. So why don't we go ahead and get started. The first few CRs are Jason's CRs. He had sent a summary around before last week's call, so I'll let him jump right into those, and then we'll just try to move through the agenda as quickly as possible. Thanks.
So, okay, first on my list here is 473221 0001. This is adding pH feed rate. So how it reads is feeders capable of supplying disinfectant and pH control chemicals to the aquatic venue to maintain the minimum required disinfection levels at all times. The request is to add end pH in accordance with the Model Aquatic Health Code. And then the reasoning is, it does not appear that there was any requirement on sizing of the feeder to control pH. So this is an attempt to limit potential undersizing of pH feed equipment, whether it be acid or CO2. So my recommendation is yes on this one. Just because it's not there, and it leaves us without it, it leaves a potential of undersizing this equipment.
This is Joseph. I'm in agreement with the addition, although I think the end pH needs to be moved in the sentence to right after disinfection so that it reads required disinfection and pH levels at all times in accordance with the MAHC.
Agree.
This is Amanda. I do think that, I mean, there's a section for sizing for pH equipment, but I don't have a problem keeping it in this section instead. But there is for 473, let's see, to 47327 is feeders for pH adjustment. And it requires any feeders on all aquatic venues upon adoption of this code, although it does not discuss capacity in that section. So although I think it's probably better included there, I don't have a problem with it being included in the other section, but that other section is for sizing of disinfectant feeders. But you could argue that it already makes the requirement for pH in that section to maintain pH. So either way is fine, I think.
Hey, Joe, in your suggestion about moving the words and pH, I'm just wondering about the word minimum in there, because it's to maintain the minimum required disinfectant levels, because it's not just the minimum pH you wanted to change the maximum to. So maybe that's why it was put where it was, so that if the word minimum doesn't apply to it.
No, that's a good, that's a good point. It probably needs to say inappropriate pH levels if we're going to move it.
Yeah.
Or just change the word minimum to, yeah, like you said, appropriate. Sorry. Yeah, it took me a second to understand what you said.
Monday.
Yes. So just to be clear, then the text would be then to maintain the adequate, what was it, adequate?
What did I say? Appropriate?
Appropriate, thank you, that was the word. So to maintain the appropriate required disinfectant and pH levels.
How about just take out minimum?
I
Oh,
think the minimum for the whole idea is that the feeders, when this CR was put in, or when these were done last change request cycle, the idea is when we added the chlorine demand factors and took out the prescriptive size requirement, that we wanted to make sure that the feeders had the capacity to supply to maintain the minimum required levels of chlorine or, you know, disinfectant. But we could say something like to maintain the minimum required disinfection levels and appropriate pH level at all times in accordance with the MAC, or something like that.
I think
That's
minimum and required are redundant. Because required is minimum.
yeah, I agree. I don't think you really need to have two. Although I see your point, Amanda, about the history part of it, but I think it is.
Technically, you could take out required. I agree that both words aren't needed. You could just say the minimum disinfectant levels at all times in accordance with the MAC.
But if you pulled out minimum, then you could say the required disinfection and pH levels at all times. It allows that move and pH that Joe mentioned in the beginning, and takes a word out.
Yeah, that sounds good. So required disinfection and or levels and pH, or I guess pH is the level too, so disinfection and pH levels at all times.
Yeah.
Okay. Julie.
Does anyone have any additional comments or questions before we vote on that with the revised language? Okay, does anyone recommend a no vote on CR 473221-0001? Okay, I'll record this as a unanimous yes vote, and we can move on to CR 473222-0001.
Okay, so this request is to eliminate eliminate the section that for sizing of chlorine and dosing and generating equipment to be or shall be based on the following chlorine demand factors. And then it goes into its surface area. No, I'm not sure. I don't have my screen up, so I'm not sure if you guys are reading this here too, so I don't have to go through the whole thing. Amanda, do you have this up on the screen?
Yeah, I can pull it up and share my screen. Hold on.
Okay, so that way I don't have to waste everybody's time with reading through it. But essentially, it eliminates the language that says calculations based on surface area, volume, type in use of the space, flat water versus agitated versus hot water, aquatic venue type, so spa, wading pool, wave pool, water slide, interactive, water play venue, therapy pool, indoor or outdoor, exposed to UV sunlight or not, anticipated maximum water temperature, anticipated number of phasers per day, cyanuric acid used, anticipated typical, atypical water loss, anticipated exposure to vegetation, airborne debris. So the reason for the request is no demand factors are given to allow for the sizing of the equipment. It appears that these are considerations that would be better addressed in the annex. There is nothing here that is enforceable. It just adds unnecessary length to the code. My recommendation for this, personal recommendation, is no, a no vote, because we deal with this all the time in the field and undersizing of this equipment, because on paper it works for the pool, but when you take into account these other contributing factors, the equipment then becomes undersized, and it happens more than not where I'm at. So although no demand factors are given, and it's also not enforceable language, yes, my thought is until better language is presented that takes in these considerations, that it remains the same. And then we look at language for changing on the next go around that makes this more enforceable and that provides some type of demand factors to it, do more research on it.
In the last go around, this language was added in lieu of the pound per day requirements that were in there. And Richard Falk was going to come up with a model, and then hopefully could get industry consensus on how to actually calculate all the demand. But as far as I know, well, he hasn't submitted a change request with it, so I don't think he's quite done with it, although I think he's done some work on it. In the meantime, yeah, I'm kind of mixed on this since I was more of a fan of the pound per day requirement. Yeah, this is unenforceable the way it is now.
This is Amanda Ellens, right? So last time around we were supposed to get some annex discussion about, for both designers and also local health department people in terms of reviewing plans, some more detailed information on the annex on how to actually use these chlorine demand factors to determine sizing. It doesn't seem like that had ever happened. That was all supposed to happen, after the conference in 2017. So that's definitely still needed. But I think if we took this out right now, we would be left with no sizing requirements or no guidelines for how they should be sized. I think we skipped over one CR, which was just the requirement to size in correlation with the chlorine demand factors. I'm trying to get it's not letting me share my screen, but we can certainly weigh this CR first. It's just the previous one that's referencing chlorine demand factors. So I think that we need to focus on getting this information in the annex as opposed to assist with doing so, to kind of fulfill the idea of making, feeder sizing more of a performance-based standard, but also provide information in a model so that it could be done.
With regard to making this enforceable, is there a way to add some language that that these factors should be taken into consideration in an engineering or some sort of engineering calculation or
Yeah, that all got added. There's the documentation that the design professional should provide adequate documentation to demonstrate that the selected feeders and equipment are sufficient size and capacity to meet those chlorine demand factors. There was also an operational requirement added, which I think we'll actually be hitting on at some point, that if if it was undersized, that they would be required to add additional capacity after the fact. So that was all done as part of making of the changes last time around in the last change request cycle.
So if there's a requirement for a design professional to provide that information, then we can require a design professional to consider these, that their submission has to include these things, and then that becomes maybe enforceable at the design approval process?
Well, it would be up to the AHJ to determine, and that might be what's the hard part, that that the information provided shows that they're being sized and taking all these factors into account. And so, but then there's also the added step that if in the real world, if it's showing that consistently the feeder capacity is unable to meet minimum disinfectant levels, then there's some teeth that allows them to go back and say, no, you need to add capacity here. Actually, that's in the upon operation section. That's 473224. Let me my screen. I'm gonna actually bring up the MAC here. So this is if everyone can see, so this is the whole section.
Oh yeah, I think it's covered from an enforceable standpoint with 223.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is too. I think I was wrong in what I said before.
So we did feel like it would be useful to have some models in the annex. I think there's some discussion as to whether or not people would want to supply that information. If companies kind of have their own models, they might not be willing to share those necessarily. So I think the discussion was that maybe a few companies would get together and kind of determine, a model that could be used. But I'm not sure, what those discussions were after the conference about, the ability to actually do that and get agreement and feedback. But ideally, yeah, there was supposed to be information to help authorities having jurisdiction, or even designers who aren't so familiar with this determine what values to use for what factors and kind of put together something. So, but I think this change request doesn't provide any alternative. It just proposes to delete the section. So then we would really not be left with much at all, because it's requiring sizing in accordance with the MAC, but then it's proposing to delete out the sections that say how to size it.
Right.
Yeah, regarding history, Richard Falk had volunteered to head that effort to come up with, a way to calculate demand. And I know that, and I volunteered to be on that committee with them. and we've just been really busy with the cyanurate committee. And I don't know if there's any other reasons on his part, but for me, that was the prevailing reason.
Just as an aside, if we'll make a notation, we'll add a chlorinator sizing or feeder sizing committee for the next edition and try to have that worked out by the 5th ed.
Great. So I brought up the CR. I think we should stay in order. I think that the CR before, which was 473-222-0001, it's pretty much the same rationale, that it's the same submitter, and it's proposing to delete the section before the one that actually lists the chlorine demand factor. So if everyone feels comfortable, we can just go and vote on both of those CRs. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions before we vote? Okay, so for 473-222-0001, does anyone recommend a yes vote on this, or yeah, a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'll take that down as a unanimous no, and then let me pull up real quick 473-2221, which was the one that Jason was presenting, which is deleting those demand factors. Would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'll record that as a no vote unanimously. And let's go on. I'll pull up 473-2231-0001, which I think is along the same line. So this CR would just delete out the section that references the chlorine demand factors in MAC 473-2221, which the submitter had also proposed deleting. So does anyone have any comments or questions about this one? Okay, is there anyone that would recommend a yes vote on 473-2231-0001? Okay, I'll mark that as unanimous no, and then we'll move on to 473-224-0001. Pull that one up. Okay, so Jason, I don't know if this is a little bit different. It's not only requiring capacity to be added, but it would require that the aquatic venue be closed until additional capacity is installed and inspected.
Sorry, I had to come off mute.
Sure.
So 473-224. Yes, it adds language. It adds the language that the aquatic venue must remain closed until the design professional submits modifications to their original design for approval, and additional feed capacity is installed and inspected. And it removes the language, additional capacity shall be provided. So it adds a little more meat to this, which I agree to on every aspect except for design professional submits the modifications, because a design professional is not always involved when a feed system is sized and installed. There are manufacturers reps out there doing it. There are operators doing it, and they're sizing these systems and missing the mark. But your design professional isn't always involved. So I was kind of sitting on the fence here and thinking about all these after the fact systems or modified systems that become installed or that get installed and then miss the mark. So the design professional part has me stumped on this.
This is Amanda. I think also, within the existing MAC, they do have to have immediate correction or closure if the minimum free chlorine residual can't be met. And, if the facility is determined to have continuous problems meeting their minimum residual, then the authority having jurisdiction could always decide that, they do need to keep closed because it's something that can't be corrected easily given that there's just not sufficient capacity. And so they could always make the decision to require that, the facility be closed until, the additional capacity is installed and they show that they are capable of meeting the minimum residual.
Just to play devil's advocate, if you had a facility that was not meeting the residual requirement and was closed until they met the residual requirement, and then they told the health inspector that they would limit their bather load or do something else until they could get a new feeder installed, would we want to be able to provide that flexibility rather than having it black and white in this change request?
This is Cindy. I agree with Ellen on that. I mean, there are other ways to do that, and also doing plan reviews for facility when something's required to change, it has to go through plan review, which means the engineer has to submit it, or the architect. We have to have sign off on it, even if they're tweaking it out in the field.
That's true. This would be the type of change that in our jurisdiction, in your state with our state sanitary code, they would be required to submit. They wouldn't be able to just make this type of change on their own, I don't think, without, letting the health department know and submitting plans for approval. Which in New York State are required to be done by, someone licensed in engineering or architecture.
Well, to Ellen's point, that process there takes the entire season. So in essence, you may be closing the venue for the entire season. By the time you have the design professional come out and evaluate it and create a new drawing and submit it to the health department and have the approvals taken care of on the health department side, I mean, in essence, it could be the 3 months of the 3-month season to get that taken care of. So I would be in favor of an alternative means by which to do that.
So in terms of how members are feeling, would anyone recommend a yes vote for the CR? Okay, does that mean that anyone is would not recommend a no vote on the CR? Are we ready to vote, or do people have any other questions?
Amanda, this is Michael Baby. This seems pretty cut and dry. Let's say you have a big rainstorm. You're not going to be able to maintain that, but you surely shouldn't have to go back to the authority having jurisdiction because you had 2 inches of rain. Or if you have a failure of one of your feed system, you shouldn't have to go back to the authority having jurisdiction. So should we put a clause in there that says, normal maintenance or unusual weather or something? Because right now it doesn't say that. It doesn't give you the out.
I mean, I think that type of thing would probably be left to the discretion of the authority having jurisdiction. I think this is basically if you have new construction and you find that the pool doesn't have adequate capacity, you know, then that they would have to add the capacity. I think it's not necessarily for, you know, extenuating circumstances or necessarily like, you know, equipment malfunction. It's more that, you know, you're not, it's basically was put in the MAC last time around as a protective measure against undersizing the capacity. You know, now that chlorine demand factors can be used instead of just prescribing a minimum capacity in the MAC.
I would be okay with the change saying the aquatic venue must remain closed until the levels get to where they need to be. And then a secondary part of that is that a design professional should evaluate and submit modifications so that over the long haul, we're increasing that feed capacity. But that gives you break it into kind of those two pieces. That gives you the immediate corrective action of bringing it into the right thing. And if you do that via reducing bather load or whatever the case may be, I think we've addressed the major issue of concern, the first one, and then that allows for a design professional to evaluate that and do that appropriately with the correct submissions and approvals.
Well, I think the important thing though is this is actually in the design section, and it's also, you know, the pool already has to close if they don't have the minimum residual at the time of inspection. And so whatever they need to do to be able to immediately correct that to remain open, or they'll have to close. So if they want to try to do something like reduce bather load or, you know, that type of thing, that they would have those options.
I'm a no as written.
Yeah, this is Kevin. I'm a no as written on this one as well, for a couple different reasons that have already been discussed, but definitely a no as written.
Okay, would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? I believe I already asked that, but just making sure now that we've had additional discussion. Okay, I'm going to write down that the TRC has a no vote on 473224-0001. You know, there's always a possibility to have future change requests that kind of, you know, detail this a little bit differently. But again, this is in the design section of the code, and it's also, you know, it doesn't change the fact that if a facility doesn't have minimum free chlorine residual met at the time of inspection, that they're not going to have to immediately correct that or close. So let's move on to 4.5.16.5. I believe that's Kevin's CR. I'll pull that one up on my screen.
Yes, I feel like we've discussed this one before. I just don't recall where we landed on it, but basically this change request seeks to add language to hydrotherapy jet design in really three areas. Number one, that any air introduced by the jets does not obscure visibility in the vicinity of the jets, that the velocity of the jets does not provide enough force to push a toddler from the bench, and that the arrangement of the jets does not induce a current. And so the feedback from the design and construction and injury prevention TSC is that because this is in section 4.5 and that applies to all aquatic venues, including the proposed language within this section, would render current spawn therapy pool designs out of compliance with the MAC. They further state that they agree that it's not advisable to introduce air that obscures the water surface. And they also agree with the concept of minimizing the flow to avoid pushing a toddler off of a bench, but there's no parameter defined regarding the allowable velocity or force to avoid such an occurrence. In other words, how much force does it really take push a toddler. There's nothing specific in here to really codify. Additional research is required to define how much velocity or force is actually allowable. And they disagreed with the requirement that the arrangement of the hydrotherapy jets not induce a current into the pool, because by definition, introducing water in one location and removing it from another will induce a current into the pool. That includes all play feature slides and recirculation return inlets. We design pools intentionally to have currents, which is how oils and debris floating on top of the water gets to gutters and skimmers. And so for those reasons, the TSC recommends against the approval of this CR. I agree with that. I think that some of these are potentially good ideas, but they would need to be much better defined. In particular, the velocity and the force. I think it's just too loose as it's written and would require further research.
Does anyone have any questions or comments about the CR? I agree. I think the intent is good, but it's too general. There's too many unintended, consequences in how it's written.
Agreed.
Okay, so would anyone recommend a yes vote on CR 45165-0001? Okay, I'll record that as a unanimous no vote, and we can move on to 47531-0001.
All right, and this one, this CR simply seeks to add that the hydrotherapy jets shall be independent of the recirculation, filtration, and heating systems to make it consistent with the requirement for therapy pools under 41243. And on this particular CR, the TSC agrees and supports it. This just adds clarity to the code. They recommend a yes vote, and I agree.
Okay, does anyone else have any comments or questions on this CR? Okay, would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR 47531-0001? Okay, I'll note that the TRC had a unanimous yes vote on this CR. So now we're going to go on to the email CRs and some call CRs that needed to be revisited. And I think what I'll do, in the interest of trying to move through these really quickly, a lot of these were originally on email agendas and either ended up with an abstain vote or the technical director felt the need to pull them because there wasn't enough necessarily addressed, and maybe we didn't reach consensus because there wasn't actually enough discussion. So I'm going to try to note the history of each one, and then the CR champions, if you have anything additional to add, we can, but I'm hoping that we can just kind of clear these up pretty quickly. So the first ones have to do with adding to the definitions of both a qualified pool operator and a qualified lifeguard, naming specific courses later on in the MAC further down that would be accepted. And we had some discussion over email that the MAC doesn't approve lifeguarding or pool operator courses. There is that CMAHC certification process, but that doesn't mean that those courses, if approved through that, would ever be listed in the MAC. The idea is not to codify any approvals. Courses can change, things can change over time. So the idea is that the precedent is to not name specific courses. So for 3.2-0035, the TRC ended up abstaining from that CR. However, the TRC voted no to each lifeguarding course that was proposed to be recognized in section 6.2.1. So it didn't really make sense that we would vote or abstain from adding the text that's on my screen here, a lifeguard course with certification as recognized in 6.2.1. I mean, I guess it could leave in the future, you know, the potential to recognize a course, but since we had kind of discussed how it's not really the role of the MAC to name specific courses, it didn't make sense that we would abstain from this GR and not just vote no. Does anyone have any comments or questions about that before we take another vote? Okay, so given the discussion, would anyone vote yes to CR 3.2-0035? Okay. So 3.2-0036 was pretty similar. That one was the one for a qualified pool operator course. The TRC abstained from this via email. However, the TRC abstained from one proposed edition of a specific operator course name and then had a no for the other one. So I just wanted to loop back around for these as well. If we're all on the same page that the MAC shouldn't really name specific courses, it seems like we would vote no both for 3.2-0036 and also 6.1.1.1-0001. Does anyone have any comments or questions about these?
Amanda, this is Michelle. The only thing I would ask, I mean, is there any way, because I think there is a need to somehow identify these, and maybe the CMAC has a role in that. And I know Dewey has to some extent started working on that. Is there any way to request that the CMAC does take the lead? I mean, not write it into the MAC, but to note that this is an important need and hopefully a priority for CMAC to address.
So the CMAC certification process, it actually, you know, the course provider or whoever is looking for certification actually has to, you know, pay a fee to have it reviewed and approved. So, you know, outside of the fact that it would be a benefit to authorities having jurisdiction to have courses that were given approval so that they don't have to go and say do that course review themselves, which is not a fun job, let me tell you. I think that, you know, unfortunately the way it's set up, it is, because it is a lengthy review process, you know, there is a nominal fee associated with it, just so that people, you know, that they make sure that they're getting courses submitted that, you know, are the best that the operator or the provider can do. They don't want, you know, to end up developing courses for course providers through the, you know, comments back and forth. So I don't know if Dewey would want to speak to that anymore, but I think, you know, unfortunately, I'm not sure if there's a good way. You know, it basically provides a lot of information in the MAC, which, you know, the authority having jurisdiction can review a course against, you know, all the required information that should be included in it. You know, some jurisdictions may just take the course provider's word that they have designed their course to address all the topic areas. That's, you know, that's one option that I think some jurisdictions may do. Some of them would do a more in-depth review to make sure of that, or they might have their own requirements that also need to be met in addition to what's in the MAC.
Yeah, just real quick. One of our goals for the certification program is to provide kind of a clearinghouse in that we have the expertise to review these programs based on the MAC. So we're hoping with the certification program that we can make the lives of public health authorities across the country infinitely easier in knowing that if a program is CMAC certified, that they already meet the MAC requirements. I do want to make a quick note as I look at the CR on the screen. Starfish Aquatics Institute has recently completed CMAC certification, so they're going to be our first qualified operator training course. So we're very proud that that happened.
Thanks, Julie. So does anyone feel for 3.2-0036 that you know, there should be an addition into the definition? Seems like consistent with our vote on the lifeguarding one that we would not recommend a yes vote on this CR. Would anyone recommend a yes vote? Okay, I'm going to note that as a no. Let me jump down to the two operator training ones. I'm just going to, I don't think we need to revisit 6111-0002 because the TRC already voted no, but I just wanted to revisit 6111-0001 because we had abstained from that, and it seems like we would be along the same lines. So this one specifically names the Certified Pool and Spa Operator CPO course with certification by PHTA, which it doesn't even necessarily say what PHTA is. But so would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'm going to record that as a no vote as well. And let's move on down to 512.10.511. Find that here. Okay. So this one, the TRC had voted yes. It was part of the April 27th email agenda, but this was flagged to revisit overwhelmingly for the addition of the phrase all applicable federal, state, or local laws, rules, regulations, and ordinances. Those CRs were all pretty much all voted yes. And the TRC had voted yes here too. I'm not quite sure. I don't know, Dewey, if you recall why this was flagged. It might just be specific, maybe because it mentions prevailing at the time of construction or subsequent versions, but I don't see why we wouldn't treat this the same way that we treated all the other CRs where we're making, you know, using consistent phrase for the all applicable. Julie, if you're trying to talk, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what the background on this was, Amanda,
Okay.
and I'm drawing a blank right now.
Okay. Would anyone?
I remember the general conversation, but I don't remember the specifics.
Okay. So does anyone have any concerns with keeping the TRC's recommended yes vote on this CR? Okay, I think we can continue to keep that.
I'm sorry, is there a chance that there could be discrepancies between NEC and all of those federal, state, local rules, regulations, or ordinances? I think, seems to me that was why we went around on this one, was we felt like there might be an opportunity, because we're saying and all of those, that there might be the opportunity for a conflict, and then we don't know which is the one that's going to apply. As opposed to where it said or previously, which would lead you to include one if it wasn't included in the other.
That's a good point. I'm thinking that the submitter would be okay with just using or instead of and. I think that was probably not intentional on the submitter's part. So this was one of my CRs. I can reach out to the submitter to see if he would be okay with us changing that and to or. Does that sound like that would be reasonable?
Sure.
And then we'll have a yes vote for this one. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about the potential for conflict, but it certainly seems like, you know, that or is probably, you know, that was how it was originally written. So, you know, there may have been a reason why it was or and not and. Okay. So for 64143-0001, so this is another one that was flagged to revisit. The TRC had recommended a no vote on April 27th. So the submitters requesting to add a failure to report incidents as required can lead to a formal enforcement action, such as an order to close or the revocation of the operating permit. I'm not sure. Do you recall why this one was flagged to revisit?
It must have been an abstain vote, where we didn't have consensus on the votes.
Okay, my record shows that we had voted no. I'm thinking maybe it's partly, yeah, I'm not sure why it was flagged. I think, you know, the idea, technically,
I think,
you know, any enforcement action can be taken on anything. Sorry, Cindy?
yeah, this is Cindy. I think this, because this one was mine, I think the other thing that we discussed was that in the enforcement section of the code, it already says if you fail to adhere to the other, anything in the code, it could lead to enforcement. So it's kind of already there too, isn't it?
I agree, yeah.
And so I don't know that it's necessarily needed to put in again. And then just as a background, like in our area, you know, there's a lot of, I think 24 hours for me is pretty tight. We rarely get anything reported in 24 hours because if it has to go to somebody's risk management lawyer, you know, it goes there first and then it gets reported to us. So I even think 24 hours is pretty tight. So I think, you know, whoever's adopting the code can kind of make their own designation there, but I think it was because there's already enforcement in the code that would cover this anyways.
Yeah, I mean, for the 24 hours, we often don't get notified either, but, you know, our local health departments, especially if it's a drowning or something, you know, want to get out and investigate as soon as possible, and that's part of the reason why it's that short time frame. But yeah, I think this is covered in the enforcement section already. Does anyone have any thoughts about, you know, does anyone feel that they would want to change their vote? My record is that the TRC recommended a no vote on this PR. Does anyone feel the need to change that? Okay, let's stick with the no vote and move on. Now the next bunch were, so these were all specific to UL listings for various topic areas. And the TRC, these were all on the May 4th email agenda, and all of them ended up abstaining votes by the TRC. So I think we need to discuss these further. Why don't we just take the first one? You know, if it seems like we would have different thoughts based on what the standard was referring to, we can go one by one, obviously, to vote on them. But I think the idea, all of these were proposing removal of any requirement to meet a UL standard.
Yeah, Amanda, this was one of the ones that I was the champion of, and I do remember having a decent amount of discussion on this first one for sure at one point. Since then, I've mulled it over and gone over it a few different times, and I've definitely landed on this one myself back at a no, primarily because I kind of feel that there has to be an inspection if this paint or coating is used, even not making this modification, it still leaves an inspection requirement. So I don't know that deleting the text that they want to delete from this even really provides the relief that they're looking for. So I've landed on as it is written, no.
So most of these UL requirements were accepted and put in actually the last change request cycle. And, you know, this is all for new construction. You know, if anything, if someone's, you know, looking for, you know, a product that has the proper permeability rating for this example, you know, if anything, being able to look for that, you know, UL listing would probably be an easier way of determining it. So this isn't for, you know, this is for new construction, and it would all be kind of done as part of the, you know, the initial planned process. So does anyone have any thoughts? Sorry.
I was just going to say I agree with you on that. With all of the others, that, you know, looking for a UL mark or the equivalent of a UL mark on a data plate or sticker is real easy. I'm just not sure how you do that on paint other than looking at the spec sheet. You know, so that's kind of my point, that this calls for a, you know, a certain, that it be applied so it produces a certain permeability rating, which I think at least partly has to do with how it's actually applied. So my point is that even removing that last sentence, I don't know that it achieves anything, because you still have to inspect based upon the first sentence.
Yeah, I'm thinking you don't really need that second sentence, because if the permeability rating can be on the specification, then if the use directions for achieving that permeability rating are given on the paint can, and if the applier says, yes, I did what was said on the paint can or whatever, I don't see that you need to have the UL listing.
I mean, I think in general, as part of, you know, the plan review process, it would just be, you know, the design professional, you know, stating that what's going to be used is this product, which is UL listed, you know, either provide that on the spec sheet, or I assume that UL has something on their website similar to NSF where it lists products that have been given that approval. But I think it's more just, you know, them saying, obviously it's going to be hard for the authority having jurisdiction to determine that they were actually used. But the idea is that they're proposing to use a product that meets those standards, and that they're, you know, using it in accordance with manufacturer's instructions on how to apply it.
And are you saying it's not sufficient just to have that permeability rating on the spec sheet?
I guess I'm not sure if there's any additional things that are part of the UL 2818 besides the permeability rating. I assume that there's other things that are part of that certification for, you know, in terms of health and safety. You know, the submitter mentions being green. So I'm assuming that there's other things besides just the permeability rating that would be part of that standard.
Yeah, if you read the explanation, and I certainly don't know the standard, but the submitter is saying that standard references chemical emissions from building materials and not so much permeability rating. So removing that could potentially create an emission hazard from the product itself, I would expect.
Should those green building requirements be optional, or should they be required? And I always figured that the green building was an optional rather than a requirement.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And just from a manufacturer's point of view, yeah, the cost of listing and maintaining listings, and the lack of flexibility that it gives you, I would vote for this change request, because I think that the permeability is the main reason why this provision's in the MAC. and there in that first sentence.
Yeah, I agree. This could be moved to the annex.
Yeah, I disagree with that just because I still don't understand how you would even enforce this at all. And I would be in favor of either voting, I would either vote no on this or revise to get rid of this entire standard, because I have no idea how anybody enforcing to the MAC would ever be able to really inspect for this.
Well, like Amanda was saying, it's in the design and construction phase, so it would be a matter of looking at the specs for what was intended.
Yeah, I just look at it a little differently than other, other items that have a data plate or something verifiable. I mean, all the other things that have been submitted by this submitter, it's a very clear delineation of either it has the mark on it or it doesn't have the mark on it. This is a paint that goes on, a ceiling or wherever it goes that I have absolutely no idea. There's no sticker on it. There's nothing easy for the health official to look at other than a piece of paper in front of them that says, yes, this is what was put on. And then they've got to interview the painter to see if it was put on correctly. The whole thing is troublesome to me.
So this is all under the section of condensation prevention. There is a little bit of information about this in the annex, and it does talk about VOCs and indoor air quality. It does talk about, it says this, hold on. This section is intended to set minimum requirements for limiting VOC off-gassing from paints and coatings that could cause public health impacts during and after the application of these products. And it gives a little bit of information about a permeability rating. So I guess that's that was the intent of putting it in for meeting that standard because of this thought of VOC off-gassing, just for some history or reference.
Yeah, again, that VOC off-gassing is definitely a green building requirement. And again, I think that should be optional if you want to be, have that green certification. But for most facilities, I think it's, you don't necessarily need that. And I don't think it necessarily belongs in this section of the MAC.
So would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR?
I would. This is Kevin.
Okay. We may have to take a roll because I think we may end up actually not reaching consensus on this one. So how many no's do we have? Evan?
Cindy?
Okay.
I'm a no.
Sorry, I didn't hear those. We have other no's? I have Kevin and Cindy and myself.
Jody is a no.
Sal is a no.
Michael's a no.
Michael. Okay, who do we have for yes?
Okay. Ellen's a yes.
Chris is a yes.
Oh, Joe S. is a yes.
Tina Moore is a yes.
Jason's a yes.
Is Vince still on?
Could you possibly go in the main bathroom and bump the air down or something?
Yeah.
Because I think it controls it.
I think Vince dropped off. I'm a yes.
You want it colder or you want it warmer?
I think cooler.
Okay, well, we have like 5 no's and 1, 2, 3, 6 yeses. So we're definitely not going to reach consensus on this. So obviously that's fine. I'll write that down as an abstain for 42222-0001. Now 42222-0002, I cannot tell any difference between this and the previous CR. I think they're just duplicates. Kevin, did you notice that?
Yeah, I was worried that I was missing something. That is exactly what my notes say, is that I can't figure out the difference between this and the previous one.
It looks like it was just submitted twice, so I'll just keep that abstain for this one as well. And let's go, so 45102 is the UL, but this one's specific to pool lifts. And this one I do remember definitely got added in the last change request cycle. And as far as I know, this was a new standard at that time, and it's something that really isn't addressed by any other NEC or other thing. So I think that the thought behind adding this one for pool lifts last time around was that it really did address something that wasn't really covered anywhere else, and because it had to do with electrical safety in the pool environment, that it was important that pool lifts be designed and meet a specific standard. And it's not like being green with the paints. This is more of a straightforward health and safety, acute risk of electrocution or that type of thing. So but again, we did abstain from this when we voted for it, when we addressed it over email. So does anyone have any comments or questions about it before we revote?
Yeah, I have a question, because there's the general UL electrical standard, but I think this one was specific just to pool lifts. And do we know what all was included in it besides the electrical standard? Because the electrical standard could be a different UL standard and could go along with all the other UL requirements for electrical things. I'm not sure that we need whatever additional is put in here.
Well, I think the idea is that this is only for pool lifts, so whatever is in that standard, the only thing, the pool list has to be certified, listed, and labeled to that standard. And this is a design section item. So even if the standard covers additional things, there's nothing that's requiring anything else at the pool to be in compliance with that standard. It's just that I assume that pool lifts are going to be getting like a UL seal of approval type thing. But I don't recall offhand enough to know, what else it addresses.
So the way that I read this one and the others in this series, the carbon monoxide detector, I think maybe on-site chlorine generation systems, there's 3 or 4 different ones here that we're coming up on. The way I read the submitter's argument was that health officials are not trained in the requirements of the NEC, and they should not be inspecting for electrical safety. And while I get the argument, I don't really buy into it at all, because this is not inspecting for electrical safety. There's no electrical knowledge required here. It is literally looking to see on the data plate of the equipment whether it has been tested and certified to the referenced standard. Nothing more than that. So I don't buy the burden part in any of these, and for that reason, I'm a no.
Yeah, and this is something they could look at during an inspection just to make sure that, an original product hadn't been swapped out with something that didn't meet it. But in general, this would be something that would all just be, in the design process, and that, the plan reviewer would be making sure that the product that was chosen for the pool list, that there's documentation that that product met this UL standard. It wouldn't require, any, electrical knowledge. It would just be making sure that they're using something that's certified in accordance with this standard.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to this one like I was the other one. And based on the submitter's comments, that makes sense.
So would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'm going to record this then as a no vote for 45122-0002. And we can move on to the next one, which I believe is specific to carbon monoxide detectors, which again is something, that's pretty easy to look for during the inspection. But again, this is a design item. Just find the CR. Okay, so this one, we take out that the carbon monoxide detector needs to be certified, listed, and labeled in accordance with UL 2075. I'm not sure how many carbon monoxide detectors aren't UL listed. It seems like it's pretty common for those types of things. Would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'm going to record that the TRC is a no vote, and let's move on to the last of these, which I think is for drinking fountains. It's 4671-0001. So this one would keep the requirement that a drinking fountain be certified, listed, and labeled to NSF ANSI 61-2014, but remove the requirement for UL 399. And the submitter is saying that UL 399 requires electrical certification for drinking fountains. So again, this is something that maybe it's more specific to the electrical function of the equipment, and I can kind of see a similar logic than with the pool lifts, where, if this is in a aquatic environment, I'm not sure that these would be too close to the pool, but that we would want, to have some assurance that they, that the unit is suited for the environment. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the CR?
Would that fall under a building code?
I'm not sure, actually. I think that obviously, if let me see, let me pull up that section of the MAC. I think that it might be something, there's another section that requires drinking fountains, specifically like the water supply for a drinking fountain. Let me just pull up this section. So this is actually, all right, hold on, this is the wrong here, 4671.
I'm sure part of the building code would have that in there if that's what their building code is. So I don't know why it'd have to fall under the MAC as specific as the UL 399 in there if it's already in a building code.
Yeah, I'm not sure, the drinking fountain. I guess I assume that the certification to NSF ANSI 61 would be for drinking water. So I'm not really sure what additional the UL adds. Let me check the annex real quick, because there is an annex section for this.
I mean, I think it's in the MAC because the MAC's requiring the drinking fountain. And again, this kind of falls in that category of there's no knowledge required. You're just looking at a data plate.
Yeah, I don't see anything specific about the rationale for adding that UL standard. I can't remember if this was in there originally or if it was added on the last change request cycle. But I can see that it would be useful if it is, has to do with electric for something that's going to be, in contact with water. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the CR?
I have a question. Do we know whether this UL standard is for electrical? Because if it's a drinking water that doesn't have any cooling ability, like there's no electricity, it's just basically a valve, it wouldn't need any kind of electrical certification.
The submitter is saying that it's an electrical standard. I was going to Google that.
Yeah, so the UL 399 covers self-contained drinking water coolers employing hermetic refrigerant motor compressors or thermoelectric water chilling systems and designed for connections to altering current circuits rated not greater than 600 volts in accordance with the NEC.
So if it's a basic drinking water fountain that doesn't have cooling, then that wouldn't apply.
Right.
And the way this is written, actually, the way it's currently written would probably not allow for a drinking fountain that does not have coolant.
Yeah, for that reason alone, I'm thinking I would vote yes for this.
I think I agree. I was a no, but I think that changes my changes my thinking.
Yeah, that's actually a hell of a good point. Wow.
Okay, would anyone recommend a yes vote on, or a no vote on the CR then?
Sorry, which one are you asking for? You were breaking up.
So I guess based on the discussion, would anyone recommend that a no vote for CR 4671-0001, so not to remove the UL requirement? Okay, I will mark the TRC down as a yes vote for 4671-0001. Let's keep going here. The next one is 473-226-0002. And that one. So this is, wait, am I reading the right one? Okay, I skipped one. Okay.
Chlorine generators in UL, I think.
Okay. Okay, here it is. Okay, so this requires chlorine generators to be certified, listed, and labeled to UL 1081 for electrical fire shock safety by an ANSI-accredited certification organization. So the proposal is to remove that section. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this?
Well, I think this one is, again, just reading a label, and I don't think there are alternative chlorine generators that don't use electricity. So I think I'd recommend a no on this one.
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay. I will put that the TRC is recommending a no vote. And we can move on to 3.2-0002. Now this one is with regard to the aquatic venue enclosure definition. This was also flagged to be revisited. The TRC voted yes on this. It was part of the May 11th email agenda. I'm not sure why this was flagged to revisit. Dewey, do you happen to know? We did vote yes for this. So this would basically change, instead of aquatic venue enclosure means an uninterrupted barrier surrounding and securing an aquatic venue. It would be aquatic venue enclosure means an uninterrupted construction feature or obstacle surrounding and securing an aquatic venue.
I'm not sure why this is back up for review, Amanda.
Okay. Does anyone have any issues with continuing to vote yes on this? All right, and we'll keep going. 3.2-0007. So just as a note, this one was just a definition of breakpoint chlorination. The TRC voted yes on this one as part of the May 11th email agenda, but it was also flagged for discussion. So basically, it will remove almost all of the information here except for breakpoint chlorination means the conversion of inorganic chloramine compounds to nitrogen gas by reaction with free available chlorine. So it basically adds a lot of additional discussion, and it's, you know, recommending that this be included in the annex and not the code itself. Do you know why this might have been flagged for discussion?
I remember making a comment in my email vote about making sure that that text actually did go into the annex, but other than that, I can't think of why.
Yeah, I think we discussed, you know, how we would actually put if that would better go into the section on any section where breakpoint chlorination is mentioned instead of in the definition of the annex. In the annex, does anyone see a need to revisit this further?
Amanda, what was our vote on this?
This was a yes.
I don't do this often. I do want to, you know, to pose something for consideration. The MAC is a very lengthy document. There's no bones about that. And sometimes the document length is a barrier to some individuals utilizing the MAC in some form or fashion. As technical director, as an educator, as someone who works to and has been working for years on educating individuals on aquatic related information, I don't know if, I'm going to leave this up to y'all, obviously, but just to change wording that can give explanation to individuals that may not necessarily have the knowledge base that you know we do, for example, in the TRC, or someone who's experienced. I'm not sure if cutting words just to get a word count down, I'm not quite sure that's the best approach. So that's a concern I have, is that there's much in the MAC that, yes, while it's wordy, it also serves as an educational piece for individuals that are, you know, that don't have that background. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, Dewey, at least on this particular one, I agree with the change request as long as we're putting it into the annex, because the annex is kind of that educational document, right? That doesn't have the shallow language that explains things more. So for people who need the education, I think it would be sufficient to have it in the annex. But are you saying that it needs to be in the annex and in the code itself in order to be effective so that people will actually read it?
You know, I'm trying to tread lightly here because part of my philosophy is not trying to overtly influence the TRC. I think that when you look at how it's used, I think a lot of times, you know, the annex is not used as frequently as the code itself. So there are some things that, yes, absolutely are certain annex items, you know, but this is a definition. So, you know, I'm not quite sure that it does anything justice to change the definitions just to get a word count down. I would love to see everyone like utilizing the annex, you know, side by side. I don't know if that's what the reality of things are.
Amanda, if I may, I'm a no vote on this CR. With Dewey, I don't believe that eliminating stuff just to make it shorter is a good idea. And if this is taken out, the definition of breakpoint chlorination would mean nothing to someone that isn't a high-level chemist. Having this information in there for the layperson or something that's just barely coming new into the profession is really helpful. I would prefer it stays in there.
And this is Michelle, and I want to acknowledge that feedback from state and local health departments has been that the length of the MAC, both the code and the annex, have been barriers to adoption. But I think if we're going to look into deletion, word count should not be the priority. It should be what are people getting out of it. And I know there's a committee, or there was or is a committee that's looking on how to shorten the length of the annex. Perhaps there could be a committee that looks at the code, whether it just be the definitions or elsewhere. I don't know that just one person with the idea of shortening this here and that there is the best approach to shorten the length of the MAC to make it more palatable to our state and local partners.
I agree. And we have been talking about that type of committee for the, an ad hoc committee or even a standing committee for that, for the next time around, to try to make the MAC a more concise document, but keep all the important information. I think also, a jurisdiction, when they go to adopt the MAC, can adopt all of it or parts of it. So if they want to, burn it down, if they feel like certain areas aren't needed or are extraneous, it's totally up to them to adopt all or tiny bits of it. So I know that we had been a yes on this, but I don't really see a problem keeping it in. You guys know I've repeated this a lot. If we haven't really had too much of a problem with something, I'm kind of more inclined to leave it in, thinking that it was put there for a reason. That said, I don't know that we can get enough no votes to end up with consensus to totally switch this around. But is there anyone who would recommend a no vote for this CR to keep the text in that's currently in and not shorten the definition?
This is Chris. I'm a no vote.
This is Tom. I'll be a no vote.
This is Jody. I'm a no vote.
Michelle, no vote.
Tina, no vote.
Cindy, no vote.
This is Ellen. I'm not opposed to a no vote. How's that?
Non-committal.
Yep.
A no vote. Let's see. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, this is Kevin.
James, no vote.
Middle category as well.
So does anyone strongly recommend a yes vote? Let me put it that way. Or is everyone interested enough in consensus that we'll go with a no?
I'll go for consensus.
Okay, I think we've got enough then to have consensus on this. So we will change this and recommend a no vote. Dewey can thank us all later. All right, let's keep going. So 3.2-0024 is the definition of substantial alteration. This one was flagged to be discussed on a call, so the TRC did not vote on this one previously. I think this was Tina's CR.
Yes, it was. So basically they want to delete some wording and add in regulated. They just want to add in a few words, but take a lot of wording out. So I just need to know if the group thinks that we should delete that wording or not. Let's see. And I think I sent an email out this morning to everybody.
Yep. This is Joe. I'm opposed to the deletion. That the reason that language was included was to define substantial alteration. If you delete that, then anything that's a regulated aspect of the code would be considered a substantial alteration and would require you to go through that whole process.
And I agree. I think we should leave it in.
I agree with Joe.
I agree. We have specific, you know, and there's specific requirements for substantial alterations. So this was all, you know, discussed in a lot of detail, you know, as the MAC was being created. You know, there is, I think, some discussion, like there's no, I think the last change request cycle, there was a discussion, you know, we're not trying to make people get reapproved, and that's why we went into what the non-substantial alterations were too, in section 4, because, you know, they don't need to get plan approval and review for, you know, substituting like for like equipment or replacements. And all that stuff is detailed under section 4.1.3.
I think at the beginning I was a yes on this one, but I am a no. This is Tina.
Although I would be in favor of adding regulated aspects to it if we left the part of it.
I feel like the only reason that was included is because the submitter keeps wanting to say that certain things aren't regulated because they're regulated by other codes like building code and stuff. So I'm not sure. I mean, we discussed pretty clearly what an alteration or what a, you know, aquatic facility, what was included in that, like an indoor aquatic facility. So I'm not sure that I think by the fact that it's discussed in the MAC, it is the regulated aspects, because the MAC is what's, you know, the set of regulations. I'm not sure that needs to be called out specifically. Joe, do you mean like you're worried that they would have to get for work that's being done that might not be affecting the actual, you know, aquatic venue, that they would then have to get plan review and approval?
Yeah, I think, you know, with an indoor aquatic facility, I'm not sure. I guess I have to go back and look at the definition because I keep forgetting what it is. But would that include anything that would be not aquatic related, I suppose?
So, let me see here.
That definition up here.
So indoor aquatic facility is a physical place that contains one or more aquatic venues and the surrounding bather and spectators stadium seating areas within a structure that meets the definition of a building for the 2012 International Building Code. It does not include equipment, chemical storage, or bather hygiene rooms or any other rooms with a direct opening to the aquatic facility, otherwise known as a natatorium. So it would really be only if they were making modifications to the natatorium itself, which I think makes sense. Like say they're making some sort of change to the windows that could affect glare or something. I can see why you would want to have that continue to be included. I'm not sure that saying regulated areas or aspects would make a difference there.
No, I agree. I don't think it's necessary looking at the definition again.
Okay. So would anyone recommend a yes vote on this to remove the specifics on the 50% of the replacement cost?
This is Michael. I would go yes, because for a large aquatic venue, to get to that 50% threshold, you might never get it. You could do all kinds of stuff and never reach that threshold. So this protects the public.
Does anyone else who's on the TRC, would anyone recommend a yes vote on the CR? Okay, I'll mark down that the TRC has a no vote on this CR. Let's move on to 5.2.2-0001. So this one was addressed on the May 11th email agenda, and the TRC had a vote of abstain. So we're going to be, it was flagged to be revisited. Let me scroll down to it, and I think, Tina, this was your CR.
It is, it's mine, and we were, it is, and I sent the email out today. I don't know if I have to further review. What does everybody think on this one? They want to eliminate exemptions. Let's see. They just want to delete exemptions. They're saying that it's unclear why a facility would be issued an exemption. Why a facility would be issued an exemption. Does anybody have any debate?
So I think it's useful to have this in there. You know, sometimes, granted, I'm not sure that the MAC, and I think some of the CRs that we'll discuss that Michelle has talk about, you know, applicability and things like that. But, you know, if the code has an applicability section that talks about what it applies, you know, so you have a pool that's, you know, in a bed and breakfast, and it's not clear if that would be, you know, considered a private residential pool or a public pool, you know, and maybe it would be if the bed and breakfast was regulated like a hotel, et cetera. So the idea is that, or, you know, a homeowner association where certain things are exempt. So the idea is that if the authority having jurisdiction has given an exemption to a facility and said, no, we don't see that this, you know, operation as specified here, you know, falls within the intent of our regulations, you know, it's good to have that type of thing on record, that there's been a determination made, and that if the operation somehow changes and, you know, changes shape and form over the years, that they can revisit it and say, well, no, when we gave you this exemption, you did X, Y, Z, and now you're doing this differently, and you're no longer allowed to have an exemption. So I don't see why we wouldn't keep something like this in there, I guess.
Yes, I think we should keep, because there can be exemptions for things that we're not even thinking about right now.
Yeah, there's always going to be some new fangled design, piece of equipment, a new technology, or someone just has something weird they want to try, and maybe they can get the AHJ to go along with it. I'm in favor of keeping this just to provide an avenue for folks that want to try something new that has been either proven to work or the current code simply doesn't address, because when it was written, nobody knew it was possible.
Mm-hmm.
Something along those lines.
James can try his new filter system out with his exemption.
I was thinking the same thing.
So would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR to actually remove the section on exemptions? Okay, I'll record this as a no vote, and let's move on to 54112-0001. This was one of my CRs, and the TRC had voted yes to it. It's within the realm of the barriers and enclosures. The TRC voted yes to it on the 5/11 email agenda. It was flagged for additional discussion. So this is it boils down to the changes or what the aquatic venue that's open to the public but there's other, so I guess it could be like a wading pool that's close enough to another. It's something where it's not separated from other parts of the aquatic facility, but it's closed. So in the last change request cycle, the conditions for being, if it's closed and the rest of the aquatic facility is open, you need to do these things. So the submitter here is saying that the intent should be, as with all of their CRs that were related, that the intent is really meaning an enclosure and not a barrier. And I think just the fact that they use the word enclosing means that you would have an enclosure and not a barrier. But this was this was flagged, and I'm not sure if Dewey remembers why it was flagged. As I said, we did vote yes on this when it was part of the email agenda. I'm wondering if it boils down to the third thing where, you would be putting up a temporary barrier and maybe requiring the enclosure isn't necessary. It's being, but it seems like if it's not being staffed to keep bathers out, that the barrier wouldn't actually, necessarily prevent access. Dewey, do you recall why this was flagged to revisit?
I don't, unless one of the TRC members, flagged it.
Does anyone have a problem with continuing with the yes vote as we had originally said?
I'm trying to remember if I was the one that raised the flag on this or not. And I think, yeah, the temporary provision in number 3 there, because the enclosure is a pretty hefty kind of requirement. And to have a temporary enclosure, it'd probably be a pretty expensive temporary structure. And I was thinking barrier might be sufficient.
Yeah, I'm thinking that the first term, switching it to an enclosure, makes sense because, if it's the type of aquatic venue that's required to be separated from others by an enclosure, there are those requirements. But I think that with the last change request cycle, that the intent was that it would be a barrier to keep bathers out and not, because this isn't surrounding the entire, it's not like so the idea is that if the enclosure is required to be a certain height and that type of thing, you could even put in something that's not as high, but just really intended to keep people out. But, I think the idea was that it could be a barrier, and because this isn't, the facility is otherwise open, it's a little bit different. And if this was the only layer of protection in place, from someone getting unauthorized access. Anyone else have any thoughts on this one? So Ellen, you would recommend a no vote on this CR?
Yes.
Okay, would anyone else recommend a no vote?
Joe?
And the no vote would basically be to not change these instances of barrier to enclosure.
Yes, I would agree that the first one I think is okay, but I don't like the other ones.
I have to go with the no vote.
Would anyone else recommend a no vote on this CR? Okay, I think we're still at the point where we would have a yes vote overall with 2 no's, but we would still have consensus. And maybe this is something that can be revisited then in the next change request cycle. Okay, let's move on to 6611-0001. This had to do with the inspection frequency, and the TRC had addressed this on the May 11th call, and it was an abstain, so it was flagged to be revisited. Let me pull it up. So this would add a minimum inspection frequency of annually, or at least annually, if not more frequently determined by MAHC 6613 or other reasons deemed necessary by the AHJ. So again, the TRC had abstained from this. Does anyone have strong feelings one way or the other to whether a minimum of annual would be too much of a burden on a AHJ, or whether it's in line with the expectations? I think the expectation in New York would be that facilities would get a minimum annual inspection, although it's not in our code. It's more tied to the state reimbursement to local health departments that they do that annual inspection.
I guess part of my difficulty, part of my difficulty with this is that a lot of public health authorities are not staffed to do annual inspections every year of every pool. I think a lot of them just don't have the personnel to do it.
Yeah, I think that it might be a reason why no frequency was originally included in the MAHC. Was that it was really something that would be left up to individual jurisdictions, and also, it might follow within whatever they normally use. Does anyone else have any thoughts about this one?
So I would think, you can pick and choose what you adopt if that's the case.
So you would be in support of setting it to a minimum as the recommended best practice, and then the AHJ could change that if they didn't necessarily have the staffing or resources and it wasn't what they normally did?
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense to me too. So would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR?
Can I bring up one other issue? Sorry. It just seems like historically, this was a code to tell the pool operators and the pool builders what they had to do, not necessarily to put requirements in for the public health officials. And so just to recognize then that we are going into that ground of telling public health officials what they have to do. And if that's okay, then I'm okay with this, but just want to recognize that that's what we're doing.
I think the MAHC, a lot of Section 6 is all kind of has to do with, inspections and policies and management, basically. So, there is a lot in there already, specific to the operations.
It also has to be noted, and just kind of, I'm sorry, Amanda, just kind of second with Ellen, the MAHC was never intended to tell the AHJ what to do. From the initial inception, that was never necessarily a consideration for the MAHC.
And actually, now that Ellen and you have said that, Dewey, I do remember early on, there was a module that kind of more told health departments what to do, and it was stripped out of the MAHC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm recalling that now too. Okay, so given that background, would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'll record that it's a recommended no vote because the intent of the MAC is not to prescribe these types of things for the AHJ. I think if anything, it could always be an annex piece, with that recommendation.
Michelle, do you
Okay,
have
let's
any of
move.
the documentation from when that decision was made to strip that section from the MAC to support?
I
our
don't know where
decision?
that would be. I could try to reach Michael. I can tell you that's hit or miss.
Yeah.
But there was text floating around because that module was developed. It was just stripped out or not weaved into the MAC, I should say. There was language developed, so it's not only going to cover this.
Yeah, there was a whole
there's a document.
technical committee. There's a whole technical committee to develop that document. I might have something too. I have a lot of stuff in hard copy in my in the office that from back when it was developed. But I do remember, yeah, that there was a decision to not include a lot of that type of stuff. Okay, so then the next CR is 664-0001, and that's with respect to enforcement. So this was deferred to a call. We never voted on it. It adds a section that says if the AHJ determines that any provision of the MAC has been or are being violated, the AHJ may withhold or revoke the operating permit of an aquatic venue, or the AHJ may order that an aquatic venue be closed until corrective action has been completed. For imminent public health hazards requiring immediate closure per 6631, the aquatic venue must remain closed until corrected as verified by a follow-up inspection or until appealed. For other violations, a notice of intended action shall be delivered, noting the date the action will become final and informing the owner of the right to appeal the decision. So I'm going to check what's in the MAC, but this kind of goes along the lines of what we were just talking about, where we're not really, I'm not sure if this kind of bleeds into that, where we're not really providing this type of information, although it is more about follow-up for enforcement action.
I don't think that if there's not, what's the imminent health hazard? I mean, how's that defined as far as somebody in the field or somebody that they may think it's a health hazard, but it may be something less, or, there's no definition of that.
Yeah, it's defined in section 663.
Yeah, so there's already a section in the MAC for enforcement. In section 664, I guess that this would be intended to be at the beginning of the section, but it's, the current enforcement section talks about placarding the pool, follow up with the operator to present them with the opportunity to be heard, and a follow-up inspection, which actually, that is in here, that, the AHJ shall inspect the premises within 2 working days of notification that the hazard has been eliminated to remove the placards after verifying correction. I guess, part of the question is whether this needs to be in here. The submitter's rationale is that as written, it appears that the only enforcement action is for imminent health hazards. All the provisions are enforceable and could lead to formal enforcement action leading to an order to close or to withhold or revoke the operating permit. So does anyone have any thoughts one way or the other into adding this section?
I think this is kind of going in that same direction of telling the AHJs what they can do, what they can't do, then maybe we should steer away from it. But I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I also don't, I'm not sure how everything is actually set up with this section, but I don't see how this helps routine violations. I mean, if it was a routine violation,
Right.
they would, have the same procedures, but they also wouldn't be required to close the pool. That's why we have the different imminent health hazards. So they'd really only be placarding it for that.
I agree. I don't think it addresses the routine violations.
And there's already a section on enforcement penalties and enforcement process. In section 665, enforcement process 6654, upon determining that one or more violations of this code exist, the AHJ shall cause a written notice of the violation or violations to be delivered to the owner or operator of the aquatic facility that is in violation of this code. So, that's certainly how, to me, that spells it out. I don't think we need it in this other section here. Would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, hearing none, I will record that as a no. So let's keep going. I think I mentioned on the last call that I really wanted to try to get through as many as possible. So I know it's 3 o'clock, but let me know if you need to drop off. Obviously we want to be able to keep enough members to get a vote and not have to, do a email ballot vote, because I think that's getting really confusing for everyone. But hopefully we can keep going because obviously we have limited time. So 6641-0001 is somewhat related to that. The TRC voted, had an abstain vote on this one when we voted on May 11th. It basically changes it from the aquatic venue shall be placarded to the AHJ shall placard the aquatic venue. And the submitter is saying that this is editorial, but that it's basically saying directly that the AHJ has the right to placard a pool closed. I'm not sure if this runs into any issues if, the operator's putting up a sign and, voluntarily and then, or what, but does anyone have any thoughts about this? It's basically just changing it from more of a passive statement to an active statement.
The next one deals with it being voluntarily done by the AHJ or the aquatic facility.
Okay.
I think on
So
these, it's still telling the AHJ what to do. So I think that's where a lot of the split votes were.
Yeah, I can see if it's left more passive, it's not saying you have to do this, it's just saying that it needs to be done and kind of, leaving the interpretation, between the lines of how it should be done. And it also says that it doesn't say right now that it has to be done by the AHJ, it just says that it has to be placarded. So I don't really see a reason to change it.
Yeah,
would anyone recommend? Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if anyone would recommend a yes vote on the CR. Okay, I will record that as a no vote, and let's go on to 6642, which, as Cindy mentioned, was the placard placement. This was also an abstain vote when the TRC dealt with this on the May 11th email agenda. Let me find this one here. So this just adds a lot of clarifying text. So the current statement says when a placard is used, it shall be conspicuously posted at each entrance. The intent of the section is just that it needs to be conspicuous. The change request would be to say when the placard is used by the AHJ or voluntarily used by the aquatic facility owner, qualified operator, or responsible supervisor, it shall be conspicuously posted at each entrance leading to the aquatic venue. I'm not really sure that there's a need to specify who's placarding it. I think that the intent of the section is just that it's being placed in a conspicuous location. I'm not sure there's a need to clarify that the pool can be voluntarily closed by the operator. Does anyone feel that this that this extra language is needed?
No.
So would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'll record that as the TRC recommending a no vote. Let's move on to 6643. This is for the aquatic, the ability to request a hearing. The TRC abstained from this on the 511 email agenda. So it basically changes again. These are all changes to kind of make the wording more active versus passive. So the current section reads in part, the operator of such aquatic facility shall be provided with an opportunity to be heard and present proof that continued operation of the facility does not constitute a danger to public health. And so the proposal is to change it to say that the operator of such aquatic facility may request a hearing to present proof. So you're changing shall be provided with an opportunity to be heard to may request a hearing to.
I guess my only question is, does every jurisdiction hold a quote unquote hearing, or do they just have to have the opportunity to be heard in one way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I think there probably is a difference in the language. I also think that the may request a hearing is an enforceable language. I mean, here it's actually, you know, almost enforceable on the AHJ, like you didn't provide them with the opportunity to be heard, but you're basically going from that the operator may request a hearing to that they shall be provided with that opportunity. And I think it needs to stay that way so that, you know, they are being required, the AHJ is being required to, you know, provide an opportunity for the operator to be heard. I think that's pretty consistent practice.
Agreed.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on this one? Would anyone recommend a yes vote on this TR? Okay, I will note that the TRC recommended a no vote. Let's move on. I think we've lost one person so far, so we still have a good number on the call. The 665-0001 is about enforcement penalties. This was originally on the May 11th email agenda, but it was deferred to a call, and the TRC did not vote on it. So it basically recommends adding a section that says civil and criminal penalties shall be in accordance with the applicable provisions of state law. The submitter's rationale was that it appears that the only penalties are civil penalties. Violations may result in criminal charges. The submitter saying he's seen an example about criminal charges relative to requirements pertaining to lifeguards. I'm not sure how other AHGs handle this, but I don't know that this. I'm not sure what about the rationale for criminal penalties. I don't think that's usually. I'm not sure if criminal penalties involve law enforcement. It seems like it's a little bit outside of the scope. I'm not sure that this is a necessary addition. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Amanda, I agree that when we start talking about civil and criminal penalties, we're we're getting beyond the scope of the MAC, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was the champion for this, and I agree with that. I thought it was beyond, and the examples he gave for the criminal penalties were very specific and usually don't, I don't know, it didn't seem very appropriate.
I feel like if it goes in that direction, it's almost, you know, something regarding negligence and not necessarily just not following the code, but like, you know, willfully doing something that, you know, they know is wrong. So would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'll record that as a unanimous no vote. We can move on to 66512-0001. This one is kind of along the same suit with penalties. It deletes an existing section, but it deletes it with the rationale that there could be criminal penalties. The section that they want to delete is criminal penalty for each offense. Violators shall be liable for a potential civil penalty. And this is specifically in the section on liability and jurisdiction. So the section above this says it shall be a violation for any person to fail to comply with any of the regulations promulgated pursuant to this code and is adopted by the AHJ. So the submitter is taking out the part that says for each such offense, violators shall be liable for a potential civil penalty. I don't really see a need to take this out, especially with the rationale that there could be criminal penalties. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this? Okay, would anyone recommend a yes vote on the CR? Okay, I'll record it as a recommended no vote. We'll move on to 6653-0001. So this one again, this is about falsified documents. This one again it has language that falsified documentation and or certificates shall be a civil or criminal violation in accordance with state code instead of as specified by the AHJ. So again, the submitter is proposing to add information for criminal charges. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this CR?
This is
again,
Ellen.
this was deferred
I'm
from
sorry.
the May 11th.
Sorry,
Yeah, I just
just
wanted to
thinking
note
about
this
this
was deferred from the May 11th email agenda. It wasn't voted on at any point.
I was just thinking about this one and that other one, talking about criminal offenses. You know, for a lot of the other provisions in the MAC, we think, well, okay, it may not apply to everybody, but it might be good to have it in there for the jurisdictions where it would help. Like you can choose either to incorporate it or not incorporate it. And I'm just thinking for jurisdictions where that would be a factor, do we want to consider adding criminal in there just for that reason or not? I'm just playing devil's advocate.
I don't know. I don't know if it opens up a can of worms, but I also don't agree with the part that says in accordance with state code instead of as specified by the AHJ, because you know, state governments operate differently all over the country, and it might not be something. I don't know enough about criminal and civil law to know if state code is specific to criminal or what, but I'm not sure that this is the place for it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to no vote. I just wanted to bring that up.
I would assume that the criminal violations that that would only be something that law enforcement could bring a facility up on, so it would be outside the scope of the MAC entirely anyway. but I don't know enough to know how that all works and how it would work in different states.
Okay, I'll stop being devil's advocate and just be quiet so we can get going.
Yeah, I don't know that, it mentioned the ability to pursue criminal charges, but I don't know that the MAC not listing it would make it impossible for law enforcement to pursue criminal charges if they saw fit. So.
No, Amanda, all the states will already have this coded into whatever their rules and codes already say, whether or not it's going to be criminal, civil. This isn't something that needs to be addressed. I'm in favor of just leaving everything the way it is. And just to address all of these that we've been going through and to make a comparison to the FDA food code. The FDA food code does say that things like the regulatory authority shall inspect, so often and things like that. But all of these types of requirements are in a very separate chapter of the food code. So it's very easy to include or not include when adopting by reference. So a jurisdiction can say, we don't want this or we do want this. So if all of these were put into a very separate chapter, I'd be in favor of including them, or even a separate chapter of the annex. So it's easily kept separate from the rest of the MAC. That might be useful. So one reason that I can think of to have these in the MAC for someone looking to adopt this by reference is that it may make it easier, at least at a state or at a state level. It may make it easier to require inspections be more uniform across, or how they're enforced to be more uniform across the state if it's adopted as part of the code by reference. But like I said, I'm in favor of keeping these just the way they are, and I'm along with everybody on the votes they've been making. So anyway, that's just all for me.
Amanda, this is
Okay, thanks, Chris. I think it might be a useful thing to do in the future, to have that type of thing. There's been a lot of discussion about the organization of the MAC. Michelle, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did want to say something. So when the MAC goes through CDC clearance, it does go through our Office of General Counsel. But if there's like this whole section where we're starting to talk about criminal violations, whatever, I can send that text specifically to the Office of General Counsel, and just, if we have questions, I can ask them and follow up. But they have reviewed it in the past. That being said, this is a 300-page document, and they might have overlooked this. But if that provides any guidance or insight.
I think that would be definitely good to know if we were considering, it sounds like most of these are no votes, but if we were considering, doing that, or even if there was, more discussion on including that type of information, that would definitely be a good resource for that. I think a lot of it might also boil down to the fact that CDC is not a regulatory agency, but FDA is in some respects. But
I also think if there's significant injury, illness, or death as a result of willful violations of some of these things, that the criminal piece takes care of itself. There'll be an investigation. It'll take care of itself. I don't know that we need to specify that in here.
right. Okay, so for 6653-0001, would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'm going to list that as a no, and let's go on to 6654-0001. This is the last one dealing with all the enforcement processes. So this one strikes the entire statement. Upon determining that one or more violations of this code exists, the AHJ shall cause a written notice of the violation or violations to be delivered to the owner or operator of the aquatic facility that is in violation of this code. you know, the submitter's rationale would be that this would be dictated by state laws in effect, and again, about civil and criminal penalties. But I think this just basically discusses that, you know, if you're going to do an inspection and cite violations, that the operator is entitled to get a copy of that report, and be let known in writing so that they can, you know, be able to see what's been cited. I don't think that we should take this section out, especially because there's no proposed alternative.
I think the statement makes absolute sense. It just violates that rule about not telling the AHJ what to do.
Yeah, I feel like this is more because it's not necessarily telling them like how they should do things. It's just that, you know, it's really standard practice that, you know, that you need to let the operator know what you're finding, and that you cited a violation. It kind of goes along with the sections above about the opportunity to be heard, that you need to provide that opportunity to be heard. You need to provide them with documentation of the violations you've cited. It's just in terms of being, you know, clear and transparent with the operator.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's what I had in my notes too.
That also protects the AHJ, right? From the standpoint that it takes away the owner operator's ability to say, they never told me that.
Exactly.
Right. Yep. So would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to 486-111-0001. This is another one of those barrier and enclosure CRs. The TRC had recommended a yes vote on this one back on the May 11th agenda. I'm not sure why this was flagged for follow-up. I'm pulling it up. All it is doing is changing the title of the section from barrier to enclosure. Given that the section references an enclosure, I don't know why we would want to have the title be barrier. It seemed pretty straightforward. Do you recall why this would have been flagged?
I don't, Amanda.
Okay, I'm gonna, does anyone have any issues with continuing the yes vote for this CR to change it from barrier to enclosure? All right, I'm just gonna go that we're gonna continue this with the yes vote. This next one, the TRC had voted to abstain on the 511 email agenda, and so I think there's a little bit more discussion that might be needed. So this one is 486-222-0001. This was regarding exit pathways and barriers versus enclosures. I think that this one was a little more straightforward in terms of whether the intent was originally to be a barrier and not just an enclosure. The section is exit pathways shall be separated with a barrier from aquatic venues not in operation. And so I think the question is whether or not, you know, an enclosure is really actually needed, and whether or not the original intent of it being a barrier made sense. And I think it probably made sense that this would just be that you know, although I don't know, maybe it's that the exit pathway, you don't want anyone to be able to get into an aquatic venue that's not in operation. But to me, that would be whatever the requirement is to have an enclosure around the aquatic venue. I don't know if this goes into, like, if you have, say, exiting from, I'm going to check and see if this is like an emergency exit section. I'm not sure if it's something where, like, the building egress, like emergency exits would go through a pool area. And so the intent is to make sure that, you know, that nobody ends up in the aquatic venue when they're exiting the building. Does anyone have any thoughts about this one? I'm going to check the MAC and see the specific section that this is in.
I I have a question about clarification. So if your indoor pool has a door to the outside, so that's by definition, then I guess kind of an emergency exit. Are you saying that you would have to wall off that door from the pool so that it would be an enclosure?
Yeah, so the current section says enclosures for aquatic venues shall not block or encumber a required emergency egress path from other structures. And that where a required emergency egress path enters an area occupied by an outdoor aquatic venue, emergency exit pathways from the building or buildings shall continue on deck of at least equally unencumbered width and continue to the enclosure and through gates. So then the section that they want to change says exit pathways. Exit pathways shall be separated with a barrier from aquatic venues not in operation. But then seasonal separation is the one following that, which says seasonal separation may be employed at seasonally separated aquatic venues, but shall be subject to the same physical requirements of permanent enclosures for aquatic venues in MAC 486. So I guess I could see this either way, going from barrier to enclosure. Does anyone have any thoughts about this?
I think
Obviously, enough people were, sorry.
I was going to say, does it need to match the one we just voted on about aquatic venues not in operation? Or is this going to be a completely separate requirement from that? We just talked about one with keeping barriers, I thought, around venues not in operation, as opposed to enclosures for that, because of the realities of that. And to Ellen's point, you know, if you have to wall off all those venues, I'm not sure you're not creating a worse environment.
Yeah, I guess the idea is, you know, there are a lot of instances where barriers seem to be used interchangeably for enclosure, but I'm not sure that this isn't one of those where, let me check the annex, that barrier was actually intended here,
Yes.
and that it wasn't necessary to be an enclosure.
Yeah, I'm looking at 486221, yeah, where it talks about like going from indoors to an outdoor aquatic venue, and you know, having an emergency pathway that goes through that section. And I'm just thinking about our local Y, and yeah, the indoor pool does have a door that goes to the inside of the fence of the outdoor pool. And thinking, okay, so they would have to completely redo all that fencing so that you couldn't access the outdoor pool from the indoor pool if you're doing an emergency exit. Is that what that's saying?
Yeah, it looks like actually there's a good amount of discussion in the annex. Let me switch this to that to show you that window. So you can see this emergency exit path section. It's the intent to you know, prevent them from exposing building occupants to unguarded aquatic venue areas. And it does discuss enclosures throughout. It doesn't mention barriers. So that makes me think that the section on exit pathways, that the intent really was that it would be a barrier and not an enclosure, or an enclosure, not a barrier. Does that make sense?
Would you mind going back to that annex text again?
You want, oh, sure. Come on. Can you see it now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
I think I'd be in favor of this to change it to enclosure. And this is for new construction, so I think the idea would be that you just wouldn't design it so that any egress from an emergency exit would lead into a pool area. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this one?
Is exit pathway defined somewhere?
I don't know.
It almost reads as though the exit pathway is exterior to the exit and not so much interior to the exit of the building.
I don't see it in all caps here, so I don't think it is defined. It might be something specific in building code, but it's not defined specifically in the MAC.
Because it's talking about emergency exits that leave the building into an outdoor aquatic venue. So in that case, it would mean that you have to have a barrier, or you have to have an enclosure to keep you from being able to go from an indoor pool to an outdoor pool. So you'd have to have a separate enclosed pathway from that door that doesn't lead directly in. The indoor-outdoor facilities that I visited, mostly you have free access from indoors to outdoors without having a secondary enclosure. You might have a barrier. A lot of places doesn't even have a barrier, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and this is all under the emergency exit path section, so I don't know if it would conflict with that. I don't think it would because it is specific. I think it means that it's that the first section is enclosures for aquatic venues shall not block or encumber a required emergency egress path from other structures. So it seems like it's the egress emergency exit from another structure. So I don't know that that would preclude like the top type of indoor or outdoor operation where you could go back and forth. It's just requiring that they separate if the outdoor aquatic venue is not in operation, that it's being separated with an enclosure.
I don't think I'm in favor of this change request. Just thinking about, yeah, those facilities that have indoor and outdoor, and where the indoor might have a door, an exit door going into the outdoor venue, then that means you would have to have two separate gates out of that outdoor venue, one for the people coming from the indoor venue and one for the people coming from the outdoor venue. And I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it is a little confusing. I mean, I don't know how this would be done for new construction, if it would be something where if you have an emergency exit from a building that you just would avoid the pool area altogether,
Yeah.
You know, of the outdoor pool. So I guess in the interest of moving on, would anyone recommend, I feel like I've heard a few people say yes and a few say no. Would anyone strongly recommend a no vote on this CR?
Yes, I would.
Okay, would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR?
I'd recommend it, but I won't be the stumbling block if we get consensus.
Okay, I'm going to assume that if no one else has spoken up, that they would all be yeses. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just trying to see if we have how many members we still have on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so it looks like we still have 10 members on, which means so that if we have 2 people that recommend against, that we would be at abstain. So I'll mark it down as abstain. Although Joe, you did say that you wouldn't block consensus.
The pressure. I'll stay with my no vote.
Okay. Okay. I mean, this is the type of thing that, you know, it truly could be an abstain. You know, it seems like there's a lot to discuss for it about the intent. So let's move on to 48632-0001. The TRC had a yes vote on this one in the May 11th email agenda, but it was flagged. Let me pull it up. Do you guys still see the MAC code, or am I sharing the change request?
Change request.
Okay. So this one, I'm not sure why this was flagged. I don't know if it's just because you could, I guess theoretically, anything that doesn't meet the definition of an enclosure in the MAC, which means like a certain height or whatever, would have to be then considered a barrier, I suppose. So essentially, you know, because my first thought was like, well, barriers wouldn't have a gate necessarily. They probably wouldn't. But I guess if you have, you know, a fence that's not high enough but has a gate, you know, say somewhere where you don't actually need the full, you know, defined enclosure. But I still think that this should be changed to enclosure and not barrier. I think it's more important that the gate be at least equal in height at top and bottom to an enclosure than to a barrier, especially given that the barrier is just deterring access, but the gate or the enclosure is preventing. Does anyone see a reason to not recommend a yes vote for this CR? Or continue to recommend a yes vote?
My only comment would be is if it's a gate and if it's a built-in enclosure that's built into the ground, I don't know that a gate can be equal in height at the bottom. There has to be clearance for the gate to swing.
Yeah, that might actually be an issue with that section to begin with, regardless. I've got to think that would be taken into account.
I mean, it's common sense, right? But still.
Yeah. I think that, you know, that it would be able to swing. I think the idea would be that you're not going to have it, for some reason, you know, stop a lot shorter.
Right.
You know, I don't think any you know, plan reviewer would be like, no, you have to have it so it can actually open. You know, has to scrape the bottom of the ground every time. So I think here in this one, the intent was for enclosure. Does anyone have a problem continuing to have a yes vote for this one? Okay, so I'll write that down, that we're continuing to have the yes vote. So the next Actually, I'm going to just jump over these two from Tina's and just go, because there's one more gate enclosure or gate barrier one. It makes sense to just do that one. So 412.334-0001. So this was the change to gate and enclosure, but it's for a passion barrier and in wave pools. And I think that this was flagged. So the TRC voted yes for this on the May 11th email agenda, but I think this might have been flagged because these aren't actually enclosures, that they are barriers. But the section says caution barriers shall be provided for all wave pools that prevent the passage of a 4-inch fall. So does anyone know more about these? Are these actually barriers and not intended to be enclosures?
No, they're definitely enclosures. They have to be permanent and they have to be fixed. And I mean, it's basically a fence underwater.
Okay. So I know this was flagged, but does anyone have any problem then keeping the yes vote for this one? Okay, I'll keep that. Okay, so there's two more on this list of ones we're revisiting. I think Tina's the champion of both of these. So there's 4, 6, 7, 11. And go find that one. Oh, sorry, 46711. That's why I can't find it. So this one is striking the statement, alternate locations or the use of bottled water shall be evaluated by the AHJ. And this, so that one was in the May 4th email. I think there had been some discussion and we deferred it to a call. So the submitter's rationale is that Section 46712 already provides alternate locations when a drinking fountain is not provided. A permanently installed drinking fountain is a more reliable source of drinking water than bottled water. So does anyone have any thoughts on this one?
My vote might have been different pre-COVID.
I think that, you know, this is another one where they kind of want to strike the point that it's kind of a reminder to the AHJ that this might be something that they could, you know, evaluate as a different option. So the idea is striking that section and saying that, you know, bottled water, you know, they might just put it out for inspections. But I would think that that would also be, you know, something that, you know, if patients are being required to purchase water or something, you know, I feel like that type of complaint would kind of get around. So let's see.
I know a lot of this is Tina. I know a lot of hotels and like they're starting to go to bottled water. So you buy from the bar. So I know our city, in our building code, we make them put a drinking fountain in. And the state code, Texas state code says that you need a drinking fountain accessible to the pool enclosure.
So currently the annex says the AHJ may approve a bottled water supply in place of a drinking fountain. The water from a bottled water supply shall be as readily accessible to bathers as would the water from a drinking fountain. So I think, so basically, you know, the change request is essentially removing the statement that AHJs can evaluate whether bottled water can be an alternative to the drinking fountain. It doesn't seem like this flexibility is necessarily something, I think in the AHJ's evaluation, they would be looking at, is this being provided free of charge? If the facility saying, well, we'll provide it, but we'll charge for it, then the AHJ could say, no, put it in a drinking fountain. I don't see why that would be, but I think that, it's probably cheaper for the operator to provide the drinking fountain, I would think. So unless there's a lot of considerations for why they would, not do that in lieu of bottled water, it seems like, most operators, especially if building code requires it, would just provide the drinking fountain.
Aren't there some facilities that don't have access to a potable water source?
Oh,
Well, I think they need that to fill their pool, so.
But didn't we approve that they had, that if the AHJ approved an alternate source, they could use it?
I think that's true, yeah. Yeah. So I think this kind of goes along those lines where, as long as they're providing patrons with drinking water, that, there's other options than a water fountain.
Yeah, and all this is saying is that the AHJ will evaluate it, so I don't really see any reason to strike this. I think that'd be a no.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's not saying to do it, it's just saying that they can evaluate something like that.
Yeah, leave the flexibility in there.
So would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Remove it? Okay, I'll record it as a no vote. And let's go on to 4675-0001. This is, I think, along the same line. Okay, so this is the drinking fountain shall be supplied with water from an approved potable water supply. And this changes it to public water system. Personally, I would be a no vote on this because you can have potable water supplies that are not public water systems in New York State. Say it's a small facility and they have, an on-site well or something that's approved and they disinfect it, that, I don't see why, at least the way it's worded in New York State, that might not be considered, it might be considered like a non-community water system or whatever. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I agree with you. If it's drinking water that the local AHJ is allowing to be drinking water, then there shouldn't be anything in the MAC that prevents that. I'd vote no on this.
So does anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'll record this as a no vote. So we've finished up this group. There's still, quite a few, and we're already almost at 4. I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you all for staying late. I think that we will move these to the August 3rd call. I think Jody's the champion. If you see any of these that seem like they could be handled over email, let me know. I don't want to do too many more email agendas either. But, I do plan on sending out one last one on Wednesday, just to try to cover some of the CRs that are outstanding. But I think, we can assess that, but hopefully these won't be too hard to get through. So, Julie, do you have any other last remarks before we end the call?
No, just my traditional thanking of everyone for your very, very hard work and for being willing to stay on and address these CRs appropriately and to do the work.
Okay, well, thank you everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. If anyone on the TRC has any questions or comments, again, feel free to email me. Otherwise, we'll talk to you guys next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.